Yeah, let's welcome our panel. Before I introduce the panel, I wanted to say a couple more words. I mentioned my company is called Strategic Narrative Consulting, and to be perfectly frank, I'm no expert in fintech. And on the other hand, I do deal with tech as I consult in the Netherlands for one of the biggest tech companies, Booking.com. And I deal with finance since I work in Kiev and on a project with EBRD. So I'm in both, but not in the middle, not in fintech per se. And if I were to think of what qualifies me to moderate this panel, I would just say it's this device in my pocket. Many of you probably have something similar. And if I open this phone and I look at my folder where I keep my finance apps, and I don't want to promote any specific apps, but I do use TransferWise, I use Mint. I just was filing my US taxes using TurboTax. I check the bank account that I have in the Netherlands through my banking app, my US account through US app. I don't have Kiev account yet, but hopefully soon, and I'll get my app for that as well. So as a consumer, as a person who uses fintech, I think I've tried it in many places, and I have a sense of what it feels like on the consumer end. But we have a very strong panel here to talk about technologies behind and the trends that we're seeing. The way we'll run this panel is we'll try to take this macro view that Alastair offered, big mega trends, and then bring it into the Ukrainian context to some degree. Maybe just go one step below where we were. But then there'll be panels on individual topics and a bit more technical. I'll introduce the panelists, and then we'll do a very brief intros, and then we'll go to questions from that. So next to me is Vira Platonova. She's with Mastercard, and she oversees many markets in our region and not just Ukraine. Maria Barsuk is a colleague from EBRD, and then she deals with venture capital. And if you think of where fintech comes from, many of it is from venture finance. And Mykhaylo Vidyakin is from the central bank, from Ukraine, National Bank of Ukraine, and deals with strategy and reforms development. So the question I want to ask to our panel is to talk about either one tech trend or one policy trend that will shape this fintech context for Ukraine. What is happening if we were to pick one thing that is most immediately relevant? What would it be? Maybe I'll go to you, Vira, first.
Hello, everybody. First of all, I want to say a very important thing. Yesterday, I found out that the discussion will be in English. And it was a surprise for me. But now I see that almost everybody are listening directly without translation, yes? And this is extremely good sign. It means that Ukraine is integrating into European society and in all innovation things happening in the world, because we all understand one language and we already part of international innovation trend, I would say. So definitely you know that Mastercard is everywhere in digital and in phygital, as we call it. And I want to say that Ukraine is one of the leaders in the region in terms of fintech. We definitely support the technology, all these directions of development, and we see our role as a connection between banks, which has capacity, which has resources, which have all components to be successful in innovation in financial technologies, and startups, which usually much more flexible, innovative, and has the technology to provide to banks. But we often ask ourselves, what is actually the key driver of fintech? And my answer is that this is digitalization in all senses in current world. And what is digitalization? So this is the capacity of the bank or a startup to make user experience very simple and very fast. And I think everybody running in this direction right now. And for me, this is a key trend, to make it simple and fast. My daughter yesterday asked me, Mom, why do we need this fingerprint authentication on my iPhone? Because I prefer, she said, PIN, because I know it, I remember it, and nobody will be able to replicate it. And we had a night discussion of why authentication is the driver of innovations of the future, why it makes life of people easier. So this is my intro.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vira. I couldn't agree more. If we spend more time in the digital space, more of the things we consume are digital in nature. That's really the mega trend that drives the fintech discussion. Maybe we'll go to you, Mykhaylo, next, and we chatted briefly, and then you represent the central bank. And what are the big policy changes that you're working on, and that will impact this space?
Thanks so much. It's for me, it's an honor to present the central bank here. I'm responsible for strategic planning and process and project management at the central bank. It's a quite controversial and for me it's interesting question, because I could say that some central bankers can say that you have a conflict of interest when saying about disruption technologies or policies, because we are all working for financial stability. But I will try to say what I see internally and what are the trends. One of the interesting projects which we working about, it's development of and introduction of electronic national currency. I don't know any central bank which already implemented it, but I know that there are a lot of central banks which are actually thinking about it. Mm-hmm. I even saw yesterday a news from the Japanese central bank that they are slowed down a bit this project due to some risks and uncertain situation. So we saw it. So we're in the same situation. We're piloting introduction of electronic fiat or national currency, and I see that it could be a challenge for the classic business models of the current market players, banking and financial intermediaries. Because when you use cash and transfer cash from one person to another, you don't need banks. You don't need intermediary. You need because cash was before the banks appeared, yeah. But then, since the further development of the banking and financial services, we can use wireless transfers, so from one banking account to another, to the person who lives actually in another city or another country. But then imagine that two persons in two cities have wallets with electronic national currency inside it, and one person pays to another, and this transaction goes without banking, without processing centers and other intermediaries. So that's a P2P transaction without this flow and chain of intermediaries. So somehow, if such an instrument, such a product, such a currency, electronic cash appeared, then it will be a challenge for financial sector. Also, what I can mention, another two examples which can change the environment. That's open banking based on open APIs, based on Euro directive PSD2. This will have a big influence on the current ecosystem of the financial intermediaries. Plus, what I would say also, let's say marketplace. Then, when such an option would be possible for when banks will be open with APIs to the third parties, then different services may appear like marketplaces where what Alastair mentioned, with the different banks with different products promoting their products on this marketplace, virtual marketplace, and the customer just comparing these products and making choice on the better, quality, better rate, better tariffs for this service, can just choose the best one, like we do with the products in the supermarket. And so this all will lead to the greater, better or bigger competition between the market players, and of course it will bring more quality of financial services to the customers. And here another challenge, of course, for the regulator in Ukraine is to regulators. Sorry, we have 3 regulators in Ukraine. It's a consumer's rights protection system, which is not in place in Ukraine yet. We have no market conduct regulator. This marketplace, together with open APIs, together with big data analysis of the consumers who left after their visits and using iPhones and browsing network, a lot of track records after themselves, even just walking and Google Map showing where you walk, yeah. And when you integrate this all with artificial intelligence, this could replace the classical financial intermediaries in form of banks or other financial institutions. Just with this kind of elements of puzzles which will be united in one picture. Of course, we are too far from this picture, but this is the reality which will come in the nearby future.
No, thank you for that. I think Alastair already mentioned singularity, so that's a conversation for lunch or drinks later in the day. But I think for me, an interesting point you bring up is we talked about competition between banks and tech, but there is another level of competition across borders, right? The various governments, and I think Alastair talked about the leadership was in UK to open up space to allow fintech to kind of prosper and grow. But every country in the world is contemplating this. How do you stay ahead? How do you regulate in a way that doesn't stifle innovation? But promotes it. How does regulation ever keep up with changing technology? And it's good to see that within central bank those discussions are taking place. And the East Coin, if you've heard from Estonia, there's discussion there. They've led with the digital ID, and that opens up space for innovation. And hope to see more of that in Ukraine. We'll go to you next, Maria. As person who deals with venture capital, what's your sense of our tech scene and fintech in Ukraine?
Well, hello everyone. So first of all, I would like to just to follow up with Vira and what just Vira and Mykhaylo said, is that's true that we are kind of moving towards the seamless flow of transactions and of data and of user experience among the banks, and this is very true that the digitalization is coming into place, and this is very, very like something that is happening right now. So if we speak about the venture scene in Ukraine and the fintech venture scene, first of all, when we speak about Ukraine, we speak about the tech talent that is in place. And from the tech talent perspective, artificial intelligence is something that is really happening, and that was what Michael just said. And it's more about the companies that are building the technology based on the processing data. It's like scoring systems. It's like some build-ups to the banks that allow them to attract customers as fast as possible and as much as possible. So these two trends, I would say, this one trend of artificial intelligence and some companies that are dealing with with the credit scoring and with the traction of users. And also from the perspective of if we speak about Ukrainian market, then here it's like the challenger banks coming into place. It's like the purely online banks that don't have any branches, and that really improves their margins, and they're very competitive comparing to the standard banks.
No, this is great. This is actually a great pivot. What I wanted to ask, Alastair, it's your first trip to Ukraine. You've not seen it all yet, but what are your first impressions? You know, do you see something from your wider experience? How do you sense this market, and what is unique about Ukraine that you've experienced so far?
Well, I mean, I think, as I said in my introductory words, I've only been here a day, but I've already had many conversations with people that, and picking up on Vira's point about language and openness, I think is just such a critical factor in the world today, not just in fintech, but just in general. We live in very volatile times, and the media has a lot to answer for that. I think constantly pointing out to people some of the challenges in the world without balancing that with some of the fantastic things that happen every single day is an abuse of power, in my mind. I think that if you're the only person with a microphone in a room and you decide to show 70% or 80% bad and only 20% good, then you're not doing your job. And so one of the things that has really warmed me is the openness, the willingness to listen and learn, and to be part of a broader ecosystem. And that's the most important ingredient you could ever ask for. I know the fintech scene has been going for some time here, but we're working on a project. Mykhaylo and I were just discussing it with Kazakhstan. Many of you will be aware they're launching a new financial district in Astana called the AIFC in July this year. They're adopting English rule of law to be able to create an ecosystem that can then work with other ecosystems around the world. But having come here and been given the tour by Nicholas this morning and seen the coding school and seen the environment that you've got here, you don't have to make the mistake of trying to compete with other parts of the world on all levels. You don't have to be as big a fintech center as London or you failed. You don't have to be as big a tech center as Silicon Valley or you failed. What you have to do is find some areas where you can create expertise. And what's so exciting about this for me is you've got the right environment now. Pick one or two things. Learn from the people that are coding and say, where's the specialism? If you look at what Israel has done in security over the years, if you look at what India did in outsourcing over the years, you can find an area of specialism. And the great thing about fintech, if we just come back to fintech for a sec, is if you break it down, and we think of fintech in sort of 4 verticals. So we think about banking and payments, we think about capital markets, we think about wealth and asset management, and we think about insurance. You think of those 4 verticals. And then if you put horizontals across all of them, there's loads of different areas in each of those industries of new innovation. There's the back office, the middle office, the data, the consumer front end. So you build a grid in your mind and you say, okay, where in the world are they the experts in that? And you'll probably find there's still quite a few holes. There's still quite a few areas where someone hasn't created that center of excellence. And so you've got this great advantage that you don't have a lot of legacy. You don't have this kind of feeling of how do we reinvent the wheel? You have an environment here where you can say, what's going on in the world, reverse innovation, learn from Africa. Many of you will have heard of M-Pesa in Kenya, a mobile banking service that was created in the UK, launched into Kenya. Everyone said, why would a society that's only got 20% of the population banked need a mobile payment service? And now over 50% of all transactions in Kenya go across M-Pesa. 50% of all transactions, cash, non-cash, completely transforming that society and helping people trade their way out of poverty. And one of the great opportunities here in Ukraine is to say, can we have an M-Pesa moment? is there something we can build here, either for ourselves or the region, that puts us on the map? And you only need one success or two successes for it to start motoring. Success breeds success. It's what Silicon Valley has done so well over the years. You know, billionaires that have built billion-pound companies then reinvest in the ecosystem, and so it goes. So, you know, I wouldn't allow yourself, to my Warren Buffett quote, to be studying too much history and thinking about how did others do it before. I'd be looking much at the present, looking what's going on around the world now, and say how could we plug the gap.
No, thank you. I couldn't agree more. The competition has to do with niche, and then Ukraine needs to find its niche and kind of try to get ahead and lead in a set space versus trying to compete with Silicon Valley, and probably that's not an option for most countries. Maybe I'll give you a few things to react to. You know, we did talk about the Kodak moment for finance industry. Recently, Amazon's been talking about the checking account. You know, if you think of Amazon, is it a retail company? Is it a logistics company? It has its cloud services. So is it a software company? Now it's producing movies. Is it you know, media company? Like, what is it? And there's this worry that the tech will consume everything around it, right? Everything will be consumed by tech. But on the other hand, yesterday's headline, I wanted to always check ahead of the panel, you know, what's going on in the space. And Santander, a Spanish bank, announced that they will use blockchain to enable cross-border transactions. Apparently, it takes 3-4 days to transfer money using standard banking system within Europe, or between UK and Europe, and they're claiming that through this new technology they're introducing, blockchain technology, they'll shrink this time to within a day. But so you have kind of established, you know, 100-year-old institutions embracing new technology. But there is this kind of disappearing boundaries of where one industry starts, the next one ends, and where does everything fit together? So maybe the question to the panel, and you guys feel free to react in whatever way you can, you know, who's going to consume who? Is it tech will take over banking, or banking will embrace tech? And maybe give an example of what you're dealing with in your fields. Start with you.
It's a good question. And we are asking ourselves each day this question. So I said we selected the role of connecting fintech and banking. And I would say that I see now few examples on a really successful connection, mostly because of the fact that there is no regulation, there is no kind of ecosystem created, and rules how banks should interact with financial technological companies. But at least there are already a couple of very successful cases in Ukraine when bankers launched startups in fintech, and they're really booming the market. And I expect that big giants, big international banks, state-owned Ukrainian banks will also continue moving in this direction and finally interact very successfully with key fintech companies in the country. So this year should be a revolutionary one in this sense, I think. So it's coming. There is no way the evolution will turn in different direction. It will happen.
Have you seen an example where a bank acquired a tech startup? Anyone? Is there? Maybe we'll go to you, Mykhaylo. Have you seen this happening through acquisition or through kind of internal tech development?
I saw after one open banking hackathon, which was organized by one big bank in Ukraine. They actually, as a result of this hackathon, they bought one fintech company which provides chatbot technology for serving consumers of this bank. They actually financed one fintech company for further for further development. And they also announced that with another fintech company, they will do a partnership agreement for providing some analysis of it was a fintech on agri. They can see from the satellites and using this open data, historical open data on the quality of the land plots in all throughout the world. They can forecast the harvest, the quality of harvest and quantity of harvest for the certain land. And banks can use it for analyzing of the agri companies, farms, in order to project the credibility and the return of investments to provided to this company. So this was the result. Three companies, and were successfully.
No, this is a sign of things to come. If banks are now comfortable, monitoring the capacity of fields, that's, to me, is groundbreaking. That people that deal with finance are willing to kind of go out of their comfort zone. And for you, Maria, have you seen good acquisition, good interesting mergers, fintech and bank?
So in fintech, I can say that in UK, for example, Barclays Bank, they support the Techstars incubator and accelerator in fintech field. So there are many startups that are working in this, and there are some even this Santander Bank that you just mentioned. They have a separate venture capital arm which supports startups in different fields. Unfortunately, I'm not able to say any names, but I know that they are very active in acquiring some companies in South America, where there are a lot of fintech startups that are serving unbanked population. So, and because the Santander is also kind of very active there, so they trying to be through acquisition, they try to tackle this part of the market. And also, if we go back to your question about who will overcome who, I think that they will just merge, kind of, and there will be no just the border between the two will be less and less. Smaller and smaller, and there's also if we go back to this. So financial institution is kind of it's an intermediary, and the whole technology is moving towards removing any intermediary, and this is something that that can be as a threat to the banks. At the same time, if they will be responding quickly, they still can be in place, because even though we want to remove the intermediary, we still want to have trust, what Alastair has said in his presentation. And by providing this trust, the banks still can remain, but they have to be very technologically developed. And actually, in the world, they are moving towards this. For example, with the blockchain technology, they trying to replace right now SWIFT, and there are more and more banks are joining this R3 it's kind of a union or partnership company called Corda. They raised a lot of money in the United States, and now they're kind of attracting more European banks, and it's still unclear which kind of technology or which company that is providing this technology will win. But we see that banks are very active players in this place, and they are partnering all together. Again, it's more to speak to the cross-border transactions to improve them.
No, thank you. And now we'll open to questions in the room, but I wanted to go to Alastair before that. So think of what you'll ask. But in this question, who will eat? Silicon Valley will eat the banks, or banks will adopt. There is this kind of sense that of certain level of unfairness, because the way that all the tech businesses operate, they convince the regulators that they're not falling within this or that space, right? They say, we only do this lane, and it doesn't fall under your mandate to regulate us. And that's how they seem to be getting ahead. It's how current discussion with Facebook. Are they the media company? Are they supposed to be regulated in the same way news media is regulated or not? And tech companies always make the case that they fall outside of whatever boundaries. And then on the other hand, the banks are heavily regulated, but they're allowed to operate in this space, whereas tech businesses are not. So they have experience and they understand it better. So who has the edge, and how do you see this evolving?
Well, I think the previous comment was a superb one. I think it's, it fuses, it becomes, integrated, and then you have to pick up on your point about where does regulation start and where does it end. And again, our Prime Minister spoke openly at the World Economic Forum about, if you're going to ultimately be looking after people's money or you're looking after people's security, we need to look at you as we would any other entity in that space. And it does sometimes take regulators a bit of time to catch up. They monitor and then they regulate. I don't think, Amazon, we have representatives from Amazon here. Amazon are applying for banking licenses in various parts of the world. They're not going to recreate their business to become a bank, but they'll probably provide banking services. But banking's not as easy as some people think. Yeah. There's some pretty deep work that goes on under the surface to make a successful bank. If I can, rather than make big predictions about winners and losers, the business models or the mindset that I think wins, if you look at eBay as a fantastic technology business that created a marketplace, a brand new marketplace using the internet, the wave of the internet. But then they didn't rest on their laurels and they invested in PayPal, and they had a boardroom framework that they called the 70-20-10. And the agreement was that they would spend 70% of their time, energy, capital, bandwidth on the core, which was eBay. They would spend 20% of their time on what they called the tangent, which was PayPal. And then they would spend 10% of their time in the blue sky. And they acquired Skype, if you remember. The idea was you'd have an integrated Skype experience. You could pay instantly using PayPal, and you could see the goods that you were buying. And the Skype bit didn't work out, and they were humble enough to just say, it hasn't worked out, and they sold it to Microsoft, and that was fine. And now they're working on other blue sky stuff. In the meantime, PayPal became much more valuable than the mothership, and demerged, and is now much more valuable than eBay. If I was looking at the space and drawing up an investment thesis, I would say banks that are starting to think like that, and you see banks producing neobanks, you see banks producing direct internet banks, using the core old infrastructure of the main bank. So I think HSBC has a bank in the UK called First Direct. First Direct uses all of the infrastructure of HSBC, but it's a different brand. And it has 1 million consumers, and it's got call centers, and it's got a website, but you wouldn't know that it was HSBC's bank. I think what's interesting to me is very smart and enlightened banks will start to identify fintechs that give them a much better user experience, bring them in and create a lifeboat on the edge of their ship. And if they get that thing right, you'll then find that the lifeboat becomes bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger over time and kind of eats the mothership. So they'll have to self-disrupt. And that, from a where do I put capital perspective, I'm very excited by a lot of the fintech. We've gone through this decade of fintech tourism, I would call it, where bank CEOs would put on a hoodie and fly to Silicon Valley and kind of hang out with the kids and think they were cool. And now it's real. They're spending serious capital. One bank in the UK alone, 3.8 billion on tech this year. I think the really enlightened bankers are now going to invest in infrastructure outside the firewall. They're going to find billion-dollar fintech companies, bring them in, rebrand them, bring the next one in, rebrand it. So it's a changing of the engine in mid-flight is probably the best way to think of it.
Great. We'll go to the room and see what questions you have. Is there just one person with a question? You guys already know everything? Or 2, 3? Anyone on that side?
Hi, my name is Anastasia Shevchenko, and my question is to Alastair. Actually, I have 2 questions,
wow.
But you have to choose because I have only one chance, yes? Okay. So the one question I really wanted to ask you when you're making your first speech here was about the entrepreneurish. culture, because actually in Ukraine we are absolutely suffering the same stuff. So it's embarrassing, and it's sometimes even a shame if you're just, you know, some kind of an entrepreneur, and if you have made any mistakes or you have failed, means like we will never work with you again, or you're welcome, the door is there. So that was the first question, was how to change that. So what are the ways you're using in the UK, how you're changing this entrepreneurial culture, I would say. And the second is for you to choose about the innovation from inside, because I know that the banks in Ukraine are now suffering from a lack of innovation in an internal culture. So what they're looking for now from the outside in the Ukrainian market is to find a solution, how to innovate from inside, how to make that innovative peel being, you know, taken from all the employers and employees internally, so that they will drive the innovation together with the company. So up to you to decide.
I'm going to try and answer both in one answer.
Thank you.
So, yeah. Again, it amazes me still today how little we think about human beings and culture when we build businesses or we write economic plans, and it stuns me. And I think this point about empowerment and letting people be what they want to be is a real challenge in the world today. In answer to both your questions, there's two types of entrepreneur. There's an entrepreneur and there's an intrapreneur. Okay? An intrapreneur is someone within a big organization who is brave enough, stupid enough, doesn't matter, to challenge the norm and to break down barriers. And sometimes it's the CEO, sometimes it's someone in the middle management, sometimes it's someone in IT. But there's always, in organizations, I think we have one here, someone that is prepared to say, look, how we've done things before is not how we're going to do them again. So in answer to the sort of second part, I'll call it one question of your question, is identify in the big businesses where the entrepreneurs are. Who's going to be your champion? Who's going to be the person that goes out internally and says, I've heard of this fantastic person and this great company and it can be really helpful to us, and they've got to bang the drum, because otherwise you're seen as outside the firewall. That then links into your question about entrepreneurialism. And yeah, it's so important to find success and then share it, right? You should think of it like a pebble in the pond. You've got successful companies here, you've got successful people in the room. You've got to share the news, right? You've got to show that it's changing. This environment needs to be promoted. This environment needs to be profiled. And you as entrepreneurs need to tell other people about each other, not about yourself, right? God made us with two ears and one mouth. And one of the problem with entrepreneurs is that they often feel like they've already got a fight, so they arrive to the conversation ready to fight, which is a real turn-off to people that don't want to fight. They're just very happy in their Truman Show life. So what you have to do is you have to promote each other, not yourselves. And what we've done in the UK, we have many programs, one called the New Entrepreneurs Foundation. We have the Tech Stars, where it's okay to be part of a new tribe. And you've got a tribe here, and then what you should be doing is learning about each other's ideas and promoting someone else's. And as long as you all pay it forwards, then you create culture and a wave. And you'll be amazed how quickly it happens. You know, in the UK, we started this program 2009, 2010, just in fintech, as I said, 77,000 new jobs. And if you're not setting up a fintech company now, you're the outsider. So.
No, sharing success, I actually wanted to mention a Ukrainian startup, maybe you've heard of it, called Nimses. Anyone? Nimses, yeah? I've actually written an article thinking that they're far above and beyond anything we consider fintech today. They're merging virtual currency with social networking and just doing fantastic things. And it is, again, I don't know where they're going, how far they'll get, but the big dreams or big ideas and kind of redefining what money is just, we see that and we should be, as you mentioned, discussing it and bringing this up. Can we take maybe a couple of questions, 2-3 questions from the room? Raise your hand if you have one. We'll go to you in a second. But who else has? Okay, one more. Anyone on this side? No? Okay, then 2 questions for now. Okay.
Thank you. My question is to Mr. Lukies, but if anyone else would like to answer, I will be glad to hear it. First of all, thank you for your speech. It's always interesting to know what is going on in the financial capital of the world. My question will concern the tech stack. You know that recently one of the main concerns of international business, international lawyers, is the openness of the financial data. Today, banks don't accept funds if you don't show their source. Banks arrest funds if they think that there is something wrong in the financial history of these funds. And tax lawyers are looking for new ways how to deal with international banks, with UK banks, Swiss banks, and so on, to deal with the new exchange of tax information, for example, with the new regulation which is now in effect in EU and in UK, in USA, and so on. So if you are aware, could you tell us what are the recent trends in HMRC technologies, for example? What are the recent trends in tech in EU or USA? And is there any answer from the business side to this new regulation, to this new EU, American, UK policy on exchange of tax information and in general the regulation of international finance? Thank you.
Thank
Wow.
you. Thanks.
That was a thesis. That was impressive.
Can we take one more question before we go to answers?
Thank you. My name is Sergei Savchuk. I got also a question to Alastair. We're talking about a lot of techs today. Fintech, medtech, insurtech, and all of that definitely interferes with regtech. So we all need regtech that stimulates innovative development and creates an environment that ensures development and financial innovations. And in your presentation, you were talking about the global regulatory sandbox initiated in the UK. So as far as we know, in the beginning of this year, the England authorities made a public statement to all regulators around the world to join the global regulatory sandbox. Can you tell us a little bit more about the success of this project? So how many regulators, how many jurisdictions all around the world agreed to participate in this ambitious project? And what opportunities will be offered to participants, to fintech startups, if they are eligible to such global sandbox? So this is going to be a kind of only regulatory assessment or maybe any other opportunities. What is your vision of that? Thank you.
Okay, I feel under attack. And I think we should definitely share the load, but I'll be very quick and then hand over. But you have on this panel a sort of living, breathing example of what needs to happen to answer both questions, right? Because you have Mastercard, which in itself is a living, breathing organism that is a sandbox, because if you go and work with Mastercard, then it's bank grade, because Mastercard have to run billions and billions and billions and billions of transactions all day, every day for financial institutions. They have to authenticate you, they have to manage your data, they have to be PCI compliant, they have to adopt GDPR, they have to accept PSD2. So Mastercard do this all day, every day. It's all they think about. You've got an investor, part of an investment group, that is analysing this space, and investors are always looking at tailwinds and where the ball's going to go in the goal in 5 years' time. So that's the role. And then you've got a central bank that is sitting here trying to work out how to embrace this regulation and create the right touch. So not to constrain innovation, but not create a wild west where consumers' data's being misused and not embraced, or we're not able to adopt global regulatory exchange. What we've done in the UK, so GDPR and PSD2, MiFID, all of these different pieces of regulation that are coming in, is we've created an internal sandbox. So we have open banking and the open banking implementation working group. What they do is they look at all the bits of regulation and try and blend them together to see if we can get some competitive advantage out of it. That was going so well, we started a consultation period with other regulators. We've had 93 regulators come and speak with us. It's not for us to say it's our sandbox, it's got to be the world sandbox. And the next announcement in that will be at the end of May. So I'll make sure we can exchange cards, but I'll make sure we send it to you.
No, I actually wanted to mention we're running out of time, so this will be the last round. And maybe, Mykhaylo, I could add on to this question. You know, the beneficial ownership declaration is something that David Cameron led on in Europe. And then I know in today's environment, this is a very sensitive and very important question for Ukraine. If we talk about fintech, talk about cashless economy, it comes at the core of a very pertinent discussion within this country on anti-corruption efforts. So where do we stand with this? You know, the sharing of information, declaration of beneficial ownership, and that's part of financial system.
For the central bank, the work already done. We opened all the information about the shareholders of the banks. Even yesterday, we launched the open platform. You can just enter the name of the bank, and you can see all the history of the management, who replaced whom, and the names of the management, current management and former management. The same job should be done, of course, in other financial sectors, and other regulators are working on it. And of course, we are also pushing them to do it. So I know that the Ministry of Finance is also working on the exchange of information between the tax authorities. It's some kind of BEPS principles implementation, which is very needed in order to implement the free capital flow regime in Ukraine, because currently we are suffering from strict currency controls. Rules which were set in early 90s at the beginning of Ukraine state development. And what else? So all the initiatives are in place. So we just need to keep going and more power and more motivation to implement all this.
No, thank you for that. The technology is often equals more transparency, so it's good to see that the central bank has embraced it and again leads on this. Any closing remarks, guys? Vira, to you.
If I may add, yes. So if we speak about cards and all these rules of central banks and transfers, etc., Mastercard always follows the rules of the central bank, and our motto here is that we cannot be more sane than the God. Yeah, and in Ukraine, this is a central bank. But it's a big question about international payments, and it's also part of fintech component. So now we really talk with a lot of central banks from Europe, where a lot of Ukrainians work, because they work there, they transfer money to Ukraine, and we need to build efficient channels, this money with the best user experience coming back to Ukraine. And I think it will come soon.
Maria?
Well, I just want to say thank you everyone for participation. And but with regards to the regulations and rules, so why rules actually were created initially is just because the technology was not developed enough to provide the security, to provide the transparency, and to provide like the seamless flow. So that's why rules and regulations were in place. Now, as the technology is more developing, it just replaces the regulations, because a lot of things like risk protection and etc. you can get through technology rather than by the set of rules. So this process is kind of inevitable.
No, thank you. Before we thank the panel, maybe I'll share a quick summary of what I've learned. You know, for folks in the room, if you're in the business that's not a disruptor, it's clearly a sign you will soon be disrupted. That's just the nature of things. So try to stay on top of this and be open to innovation, because there is no other way at this day and age. And I would encourage you to connect with the speakers, to chat, to mingle, to learn, to exchange information. And on that note, let's thank our speakers and move on to the next session.